So first of all, welcome again to our summer camp series. This is the final one that we're putting on. And we have a lot of people on the call today. And so what we're going to do is really make sure that we can utilize the chat. We'll have people stay muted for most of the time, just so that there's no kind of extra background noises. But we do really want people to use the chat. So the calls are a safe space. So please be brave and bold in asking questions and sharing resources in the chat. You can find the chat button by clicking on the bottom chat button at the bottom of your screen. You may need to move your mouse around to find it or to tap on your screen if you're joining by phone. We will be pulling some questions from the chat to ask both Kirsten and Nicole. But if we're unable to get to those, we will collect those, answer them, and share them out after the webinar once we have some time to kind of go through those. We will also be sharing any resources that are mentioned during the presentation from the chat. We all come to this work at very different places, so please practice deep and respectful listening and answering questions that people have as we welcome them to this space. We also know that this is over the lunch hour, and we know that people have busy lives, so please feel welcome to keep your video on, eat your lunch, take care of children, or show off your animals. Before we get started, I do want to take a moment and acknowledge whose land we're all on due to forest removal. I am in Madison and live on Ho-Chunk land. We know that people are joining from across the state, so we encourage you to look at the resources like the one on the screen to learn more, and then get involved in current Native American-led issues. Thank you. Wisconsin Women in Conservation Project is a 3-year program. During this first year, we held a series of regional webinars and this statewide summer webinar series. We also have started holding in-person field days and are moving to in-person workshops. We are monitoring the COVID situation closely and want to make sure that we protect each other, so please be aware of any updates or additional safety measures in the next couple of months. These will be posted on each of the event pages, as well as being emailed out to registrants if anything changes. The next 2 years of the program will continue to host regional field days and workshops, and the program concludes with the regional summit. So there's a lot of time for us to engage as a community. One of the biggest goals of this project is to creating this network of women, farmers and landowners and people interested in this work so that we can meet neighbors and share with people who are in your area. So we really hope that you'll come and be able to join us at other events in the future. Our final field day is happening on Tuesday, September 28th from 3 to 7 in Elk Mound, Wisconsin at the Home Girls Dairy on grazing and forest management as regenerative ag. And you can register for that event on our website. We also have 4 fall workshops coming up on establishing a conservation plan for your land. The first one is on this Friday, August 27th in Fall Creek, Wisconsin, and there's still time to register. Again, you can find more information and register for all of these events on our website, wiwic.org. Here are the counties where we will be holding in-person events in. As you can see, this doesn't cover most of the state. So if you're outside these counties, we encourage you to find the closest event that works for your schedule and join us at that. So I've mentioned conservation plans already a couple times. As a very brief overview, a conservation plan is a document that helps you make decisions for either parts of your land or your whole property. It outlines what you want to do and helps you meet the goals and objectives of your land. During this process, someone from NRCS or a different local expert will come to your property to walk and talk with you. This can be used just for you as a stepping off point or to take part in NRCS programs and cost shares. Right now, we're connecting with landowners who want to learn more or are ready to create their plan, and then we'll connect you with the appropriate content experts. You can learn more about these at the fall workshops that I just mentioned. Okay, so at this time, well, first, I'll just quickly share our content, our email, if you have any questions, or you can contact any of the regional coordinators. But at this time, I actually am going to turn it over to our first speaker. So I am very pleased to introduce Kirsten Jursic of Bratzett Family Farm and one of our conservation coaches to talk about her regenerative ag practices. While I'm asking Kirsten these first questions, I'm going to be sharing kind of in the background a video of her farm. So that will be going on in the background, just so folks know. So let me get that pulled up. Okay, so first, Kirsten, could you tell us a little bit about your farm?
Yeah, so welcome everybody. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces on the screen and new ones too. So yeah, I'm Kirsten Jursic. Hi, Rachel. I'm Kirsten Jursic, and our farm is Bratset Family Farm, which is my maiden name. And basically what we do here is we raise grass-fed, grass-finished beef. So we cow calf, we have about 40 cows. So we do birth to finish on our farm. So and then we direct market our beef. So we have anywhere between, like 80 to 120 head of cattle at a time. Our farm is about 290 acres. And of that 290 acres, I've got about 150 of it all fenced. The rest is, as you can see behind us right there, some prairies we've planted. We've got about 70 acres of woodland. We've got wooded wetlands, some wildlife ponds, so just a really fun habitat farm. This is a drone video that Liam Krivis made for our farm, and I think we shot this film in late May of 2019. So our whole farm is in perennial cover, which is important to us. All of our pastures, you can see the cattle in this little paddock in front of you. All of our pastures have shell buried water lines throughout them. And then our larger pastures, as you can kind of see to the left of the screen, we subdivide those daily into smaller paddocks with just one single strand of wire to keep the cattle contained. And then the next day they'll move forward into the next fresh patch of pasture. So it's a really fun way to farm. It's really great for the environment. It's great for the livestock. I really can't find any downfalls with rotational grazing. And it's just a really enjoyable way to spend your day. It's a great way to farm with children. The kids were always with me, farming every day, moving cattle, doing whatnot. So it's a great way for people and animals to be together. It's a great way to farm. So of our, I guess we'll just let this roll for a second here, because I think we're almost to the end of this video.
Maybe while we finish this up, could you just start by telling us what regenerative agriculture means to you?
Yeah, so to me, when I think about regenerative agriculture, I think about regenerating our landscape and all the positive outcomes from that. So on our farm, we're doing that through our rotational grazing because we're mimicking the natural ecosystem. I think that there is a much broader umbrella that affects communities and peoples and our society as a whole in regenerative agriculture. But when I think of regenerative agriculture, I think of we all only have so much time in each day and we all have so many talents. And so if we can each use the talents we possess and the resources we possess the best to make difference, that's what I like to focus on. So that's why I focus on the landscape I have. So the things that I can do on our farm to help regenerate, and the things I can help teach other people to do on their farms to help them regenerate the environment on their farms.
So I've pulled up, and you shared with me a couple pictures, so I'll just have them up here, and you can tell me when you want to move to the next one. But as a grazing farmer, how are the practices that you've kind of just been talking about integrated into your farm?
Yeah, okay, so for people who aren't familiar with rotational grazing, I'll just try to explain it a tiny bit better. You can see in the background, probably, and in the foreground of this picture are grasses that have sort of been trampled and lit. So that piece of land had previously been grazed. Then you see an interior fence, and then you see the cattle. And then to the left, on the left part of the photo, there's a white cow eating. And right in front of that white cow, there's a tiny little lead line, and that's what keeps those cows in that paddock that day. The next day, the cattle will be moved to the left into a fresh paddock, and then their water tank will be moved with them. So every day they're eating their own food and depositing their own waste and cruising around the farm. So when we're farming this way, we're really increasing soil health. So I think soil health is a buzzword everybody's been thinking about recently. So when we think about the principles of soil health, we're thinking about, keeping the soil covered. So as you can see by these photos, our landscape is always covered. We're thinking about minimizing soil disturbance. So I have not plowed any of these fields in the past since the 15 years I've been managing this farm. We've never plowed any fields. And a lot of our acreage hasn't been plowed for the last 40 years. Is my mother farmed here prior to me managing it, and she still helps me a lot. But she also had pastures that she, never plowed. So when we want to go in and interseed into these existing stands of grasses to create even more diversity, then we just go in with a no-till drill and seed into them. So we're really minimizing soil disturbance. And when we do disturb it a tiny bit, that probably only happens about every 3 years. So we've got a lot of plant diversity. We always have a living root in the ground, and then we're integrating livestock to eat the forage. So those are the 5 principles of soil health that we practice when we practice rotational grazing, which is fantastic. So once we start building our soil health, the better our soil is, the more organic matter we have in our soil, the more water holding capacity those soils have. And so through protecting our soil health, we're also protecting water quality. So we're protecting surface water quality because we're decreasing runoff, and we're protecting groundwater quality because the water that does infiltrate down into the water table is cleaner water than when you have poor soil health. So those are all wonderful things. You can also see, and you can change the screen now, or the next picture, Kirsten, please. So this video was taken it was either taken May 26th or June 26th of 2019. And so what I think is really interesting is when you look at our farm, which is the green areas you see here, and then you look at our neighboring, sadly, landscape, you see a lot of barren ground and you see some flooding in the background. And so as far as carbon sequestration goes, our grasses are always growing and we're pulling carbon back down into the soil, and our ground is always covered. And when we look at carbon release maps, for the Midwest, June is a really sad time until that corn canopy is over the landscape and covers the dirt. It's really red in carbon release. So that's, rotational grazing really solves that, really helps that situation. So we are a great carbon sink. We use very little fossil fuels. We do not spray. We don't need to spray our pastures at all. We used to be certified organic and we're not anymore, just because we direct market, and we use all inputs that are approved for certified organic, but we are no longer certified. But we've never sprayed. We just don't need to. We'll come through after the first graze, after the animals graze through the first time, and clip our pastures once. So really, we only, for equipment, we just have 2 tractors, a Bobcat, a UTV, and some haymaking equipment. So we definitely have equipment, but not a lot of equipment, and we don't use the tractors very often. We don't drive across the land very often, maybe once a year to clip the land. We do cut hay on some of our land every year, so we make that hay. But if we think about how we treat and how we use resources on this land compared to the land, this is looking south, on the south part of this property, that land is normally fall plowed, then it's spring worked again, then it's planted, then it's sprayed or cultivated, then it's harvested. So we've got, 6 to 7 trips across that land using fossil fuels and tires and equipment, which we never have to do because our animals do all the work. It's great. We put them out there, and I can't imagine anymore hauling feed to animals when they can just harvest it so much more efficiently and quickly than we can and deposit their own waste. So they are 100% grass fed and grass finished. So we just aren't using that row crop product like corn or beans to finish our meat. They do just fine on pasture. So I guess those are things when I'm thinking about regenerative agriculture, I think about, and then the most beautiful part of it as a person just daily being on the landscape is just the wildlife and the diversity of the wildlife that we see on our property. So the songbirds have come back amazingly on our property. I mean, in the spring, in June, early June at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the meadowlarks are almost so noisy. One day when we were doing a pasture walk, we could hardly hear the speaker. It was kind of fun. It was almost annoying they were so loud. So we just see these natural ecosystems returning. People talk about, I know in one of the earlier summer camps, someone was talking about how the fireflies return to their property. We've never sprayed here, so the fireflies have never gone away, but abundance of insects and songbirds and birds and in our very back pasture, we have every year when we put the cows down there, a flock of cowbirds come, so they ride on the cow's back and eat flies right off them. It's really kind of a really beautiful, sustainable system that all just works together as we start increasing the biodiversity on the farm. We see the natural biodiversity return. So when we do clip our pastures, we always clip around, we'll clip around positive species. So we'll clip around the milkweed. If there's a big patch of milkweed, we'll leave things like that. Yeah, so.
Good. So I just want to quickly remind people that you can put questions in the chat that you have for Kirsten. And on that note, I have 2 questions in here for you about kind of what is the makeup of your grasses and forbs in your pasture. And you'd also mentioned pollinator habitat. Is that next to your pastures? Are there any kind of native grass species that you've planted in with your kind of regular pastures?
Yeah, so we have a prairie. We have a land. We have about 12 acres that was put into CRP. We have different CRP plots around the farm, but it was put into CRP about 20 years ago. And so in that spot, we planted forbs, and we planted flowers, and we planted big blue stem, little blue stem, switchgrass. So that's a pretty fun little prairie. In our pastures are planted with cool season grasses and legumes because that's what produces well here. So they are diverse. I kind of assess our pastures every fall. So initial seeding example for our pasture might be a little bit of orchard grass, a little bit of brome grass, a little bit of timothy, red clover, alsike, and alfalfa. And then I will come through and I will assess the pastures and just see every fall what needs to be reseeded. So a lot of times I'll do that actually like in June after second graze. So I can say, oh, I want to come in right now is like the ideal time to interseed pastures. So between August in Southeast Wisconsin, between August 8th and the end of the month is a great time to interseed them. So will be interseeding some actually tomorrow. And then in the spring is another great time. So I come through and I assess the pastures and see what they need, what species are still there, what might be going away. The legumes like red clover and alsike and alfalfa produce nitrogen to help feed the grasses. So it's good to have a balance. Yep.
Great. I know that you work with a lot of farmers in your area also around grazing work. So what are some of the biggest changes that you have seen to a farm when they implement some of the practices that you've talked about?
Yeah, so once farmers implement rotational grazing, so a lot of farmers I work with, some farmers were just very conventional farmers. One couple, really fun couple, they had converted from conventional dairy to organic grazing dairy. And this is probably like 15 years ago. And they were really cute because they would bring me pictures. They send me pictures of like tree frogs and just different species that they had, after a couple of years of being certified organic, no longer using chemicals, of saying like, have you ever seen anything like this before? Like we've been on our farm forever and we've not seen these species before. And, they'd probably been farming their farm for like at least 30 years. They were middle-aged. So, really fun to see diversity come back and sometimes how quickly it can come back. The other thing I see is if people were in a continuous grazing system, so maybe they had 20 acres and the animals were just out there all summer. Once we move to a rotational grazing system, again, we have that plant diversity, but also we have better animal weight gains. So animals are just healthier and doing better. And then we also see that they can, once they get those pastures well developed and they start moving the cattle every day, we get more yield off those pastures. So we'll either have more to make hay on, or we'll be able to put more animals on the same amount of acres once we start managing our land better.
Thanks. I also have a question in here. This has been a really hard year for drought for a lot of people. So one, how have you fared with the drought this year? And then kind of a follow-up, how do you think regenerative ag practices provide protection for the ongoing climate crisis and changes?
Yeah, so we have had severe droughts. Our neighbors have had, I mean, it's just been so spotty that our farm is in an area of severe droughts. I'm really surprised that the southeast part of our county is not considered a drought area. All our neighboring counties are, ours is not. So it's really surprising to me. But when we rotationally graze our cattle, we leave a lot behind through our first graze. So it's a kind of we'll say graze half, take half, leave half. And so in grazing and leaving more forage behind, we're really protecting the soil and we're keeping the soil cooler longer. We're keeping deeper roots into the soil. So while we've had the worst drought we've had since 2012, we did bring the cattle up for a week and feed dry hay because we got absolutely no rain in July, hardly any in June. Then we did get some rain in August, and it is just amazing how everything just is coming back just from 3 inches of rain, even though we were just terribly short on rain for the year. So it is a more resilient system as far as drought goes, but I also feel like a lot more of it is the carbon sequestration and the lack of using chemicals as what we're doing to help save the environment. And then when we do get those rains, those sporadic heavy rains, again, having more organic matter in our soils lets more of that rain absorb into the ground instead of running off.
You have mentioned CRP, or the Conservation Reserve Program, but could you talk a little bit more about any funding that you've received from NRCS to help with on-farm projects?
Sure, yeah. So we did receive funding from NRCS through the EQIP program. So the EQIP program is a national program, so everybody in Wisconsin would be eligible for this. And so we did receive EQIP funding to put in some perimeter fencing. Some of our farm was already kind of set up. We did it on our own before we knew about EQIP. And then I learned about EQIP and I was like, oh, wow, I can fence the rest of the farm. This is fantastic. So yeah, we put in perimeter fences, we put in interior fences, we put shallow berry water lines along our interior fences. And we got some money for interseeding our pastures. People are also eligible to get money for seeding pastures. In the very back pasture on our property, which is sort of in the kind of right before the plowed field back there, that pasture is very far from the rest of our areas. And so kind of up to the right, Kirsten, to the right in there. Yeah. So this is like a 20-acre pasture that we got EQIP funding to drill a well on a steep hill above this pasture. And then we put in a solar pump back there and then just a gravity drain water line. So that's actually one of my favorite pastures because it's all solar. So solar water, solar electric fencer, which all of our fencers are. And then, just solar raising our forage. So that's fun. So there are a lot of different EQIP funding sources for people who are wanting to convert row crop land to pasture, to convert continuous pasture to rotational pasture. So the first step for that is to contact someone like me, because I'm happy to help you, walk you through and tell you who to work with in your region, or this group is happy to put you in contact with people, or your local NRCS office themselves. And so the first step for a grazing situation like this would be to have a grazing plan written for your property, and then you'd be eligible for cost share.
Thank you. Again, reminder, if for any questions people have, to put them in the chat. One question is about soil testing. Do you test your soil, and is your P levels increasing or decreasing?
So we do test our soil. Actually, that is it's like every 4 years. So we do follow all state and federal regulations. So we have a nutrient management plan for our property, which requires us to sample our soils every 4 years. Every 5 acres needs to be sampled every 4 years. Also, if you are going to be eligible for the EQIP program and you are going to want to do any seeding for your EQIP program, they also require that you take soil samples. So I have not looked at my soil samples in a while, honestly. We have definitely seen organic matter go up. We do fertilize. So when I interseed my pastures, then I will follow that with fertilization. Because we are taking from the farm, right? So in grazing systems, we are shipping either meats, milk, bone, hide. We're shipping that off the farm. So I wouldn't say that it's 100% sustainable system because we are shipping product off the farm. So I don't fertilize everything every year, but when I interseed, I do add some fertility. And then again, helping those legumes be balanced does help fix nitrogen for the grasses. So it's in a way its own fertility.
Thank you. I'm going to go to this last picture and also give you a chance to talk about that, if you'd like.
Yeah, I guess it's just over our overall landscape. So in the winter, our cattle are up and you can see down by the buildings here, you can see, where they've definitely done damage, right? So I have some exposed dirt. So we go in there and you can see like all those round circles where the round bale feeders were in the winter. And it really looks kind of messy to me. So we go in there and we'll put in, a cover crop for the summer, an annual, whatever you want to call it. So we'll graze that in the summer. And then frequently the animals will return to that area for the winter, just because that is where we have heated winter water. It works for us. It's right outside my kitchen window, so I can see them. They have access to shelter if they need it. That group does. Another group goes in a wooded area with a lot of topography where they have shelter. But I guess it's just like the overall comparison, honestly, of you see all this green landscape around our farm amongst a sea of plowed fields. So when we think about regenerative ag systems, I'm just really perennial systems are just where it's at to me versus row crops. And even when we add cover crops to row crops, it's helpful, but it's not the same. So
Well, thank you so much, Kirsten. Really appreciate you sharing a little bit about your farm and about what you do and what you talk about with people. So thanks so much. Before we move on to talking with Nicole, I'm going to share a really brief poll with folks. So if people could answer the poll question and then we'll move on. Kirsten, was there any final things that you wanted to add?
Just that there are a lot of resources out there to help people. And so, if anybody's interested in having a grazing plan or learning more about grazing, we host pasture walks most years. We have workshops. So there's a lot of resources. So do reach out and the coordinators here will put you in contact with the right people. But there's a lot of us that are, happy to share what we do, show other people our farms. I work for Glacial RC&D, and I also work for Renewing the Countryside on different projects. And so I'm an NRCS technical service provider, as there are many others across the state. So we can write grazing plans for people, help them, advise them. So we're all happy to work together and share it with people.
Great, thanks so much. So I'm going to end the poll now and share the results out with people. People can take a minute to look at this, and then we'll move on to the next part of our presentation. I have also seen lots of sandhill cranes already, which is very exciting for me. Okay, so at this time, I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Nicole Tauches, an agroecologist with Michael Field's Agricultural Institute, who will be telling us more about regenerative practices. Again, please put any questions that you have in the chat, and we'll hopefully have some time to get those answered live today. But otherwise, we will also be answering them later and sharing them out with people. So I am going to turn it over to Nicole now. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being able to be a part of this fantastic WeWick project, which my colleague Esther Shakina at Michael Fields is one of the leaders of this effort. And it's just wonderful to be here talking to you all. And it's so inspiring to see these other women doing agriculture in all the diverse ways that we do. It's very inspiring to me because it's easy to feel like you're an island, especially when you're struggling. That's why these events are so nice and helpful. So I will jump right in. I was asked to give an overview of regenerative agriculture. It's another one of those buzzwords that has come up, and I know that even coming from an academic space, there was a lot of lack of clarity for me around what this term meant, and I had a pretty strong background in organic agriculture, so this is new. So I'm focusing on, let me get this to show. Okay, here we go. I'm focusing on a general overview and the kind of history and to kind of situate the regenerative agriculture movement within the broader efforts around organic and sustainable pushing of agriculture in a more environmentally friendly and providing ecosystem services type of effort, really transitioning away from these damaging conventional production paradigms. And I work at the Michael Fields Agricultural Institute, which is a beautiful place in East Troy, Wisconsin. We're about 30 to 45 minutes away from where Kirsten's farm is at. So really nice corner of the state, as are all of them. So a little bit about my background and how I got here. I started out doing agronomic research. You may be unfamiliar, but this is what agricultural trials generally look like. There's a bunch of plots in replications. So we have 5 replicates in this one, for example, and then we impose different treatments. Those could be, for example, compost versus conventional fertilizer, conventional tillage, full tillage versus no tillage. And then we measure the impacts in these little fields. These are a little less than an acre in this case, which is a large plot. And then we sort of use that information to make broad recommendations around how like field management should go. And there are flaws with this system, but it's the best we have. And that's what agronomists do, researchers. I did some work out west where we're working on compost spreading and annual systems. So this is a regenerative approach that I'm going to bring up later. And then I've worked in large systems with large scale equipment out west, and there is I've seen a lot of soil degradation in many parts of the country, which is why regenerative agriculture is so important. A big part of my work at the Michael Fields Agricultural Institute is with Kernza. So this alludes or is sort of picks up a thread that Kirsten laid out really nicely, juxtaposing pasture, which always has perennial cover, always is keeping roots in the ground, always maintaining living cover, keeping green on the landscape. But the drawback with that is we're not able to produce grains. So we're providing all of these benefits for the land, but the main output from that type of system is meat, and we can't live just on meat, nor should we. So, though Kirsten may disagree. We're exploring how to get grains out of perennial systems. This is a brand new crop. It looks a lot like ryegrass, the seed head does. It's called Kernza, Kernza. I encourage you to visit kernza.org to learn more about this. It's the grass is actually intermediate wheatgrass, and it's being domesticated and bred for improved yield. So that way, we're not tilling every year, disturbing the soil as we do for corn, soy, wheat, virtually all of the other major carbohydrate sources in human diets. If we're able to do that and produce those important nutritional components in a perennial way, that could really transform the carbon footprint of agriculture. Kernza has also been shown to put nitrate leaching into the ground to near zero, even when it's situated sort of below in the watershed conventional systems that are highly pollutive and known to produce a lot of pollution for ground and surface waters. When Kernza is situated in the right place on the landscape, it can actually soak up that extra nutrients and prevent water pollution in a way that's harmful to the environment and human health. So there's just enormous potential here. I obviously believe in it. And so that's a big part of what we're working on with many partners across the upper Midwest and the rest of the country. So stay tuned for more on that. But jumping right into regenerative agriculture means, I want to present this in terms of principles and practices. So regenerative ag, as it's defined by many, and it's been a collective effort, regenerative agriculture should be biodiverse. You heard Kirsten allude to that a lot, and enjoying sort of the benefits of what a regenerative system can offer for being able to provide us with biodiversity. Regenerative ag is holistic, so it's not individual inputs based. It's sort of understanding the ecology of the entire system and understanding the complexity of all of those interactions, and then situating our agricultural management practices within that context. It's closed loop. So again, we're not creating a lot of pollutive outputs, and we're trying to utilize as much of our nutrient cycling and other ecological cycling processes as we can to decrease the need to bring a lot of inputs in and then have a lot of generally negative outputs out in the terms of pollution. And Kirsten did such a nice job talking about this. Regenerative ag is carbon positive. That's one of the most important pillars, which means that it's storing more, it's taking more carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it in soil than it's emitting. And so that's really important for greenhouse gas emission offsetting and climate change mitigation. In terms of water, regenerative ag thinks a lot about water and water protection. It improves water percolation into the soil through keeping living roots in the ground. That's creating channels through which the rain can infiltrate the soil rather than running off, which it can take with it soil and other pollutants. So we really do want it to percolate and to recharge our groundwater reserves. That's particularly important in, oops, didn't mean to do that quite yet. Sorry. It's particularly important in out west where water storage is really important for drought times. And then enhancing water quality. And there are many ways that we can do that and many ways that we probably haven't explored yet, but we're going in that direction. And then regenerative ag also emphasizes, much like the organic ag movement, soil organic matter, figuring out how to use natural and ecological cycles of soil fertility cycling, emphasis on biological, not chemical inputs. In fact, it completely prohibits chemical inputs. And there's a huge focus on ecosystem resiliency, particularly in the face of climate change. So that's going to protect, enhancing ecosystem resiliency is going to protect our wildlife friends, components of nature, and it's also going to protect us as humans and as agricultural practitioners. So all of these principles rest on a bedrock of enhancing human health and environmental health and in mitigating climate change. I want to put this movement in context because it rests on the shoulders of many other people and movements. And I don't have a slide for it, but it is important to state that a lot of Native peoples practiced regenerative agriculture for many generations, thousands of years, and that's how it sustained them throughout the world. And so we're having to sort of rediscover that in a modern context. And there are a lot of sort of social and food sovereignty issues there, which I don't want to go into, but I want to acknowledge that that we are all resting on following many generations and traditions of Native peoples. And we're having to sort of reinvent some of these because our world now is pretty different and our population is pretty different. So anyway, more recently, The first of these movements that fed into our regenerative ideas is biodynamic agriculture. They point to 1924 as maybe the seminal year based on when its founder gave a series of lectures. Biodynamics emphasizes symbiotic relationships, and that's sort of just a different way of saying that human health depends on nature's health. Biodynamic is sort of it's mystical and esoteric, which distinguishes it from organic. And so there's a lot of mention of life force and natural elements. It's not quite a religion per se, but it gets into some mystical elements. And there are rituals associated with that. So in any case, it tends to be a little bit less well-known or regarded, just because it wasn't based, or it wasn't really interested in propagating itself in scientific principles, which is fine. And there are many biodynamic agricultural practitioners even still. There's a certification association. It tends to be bigger in Europe, but there is a biodynamic association in the United States, and it's pretty interesting, and it really does have a lot to offer in terms of microbial cultivation. They sort of make these preparations through use of organic materials and burying them in soil, and there's sort of an incubation period, and then you can mix that in water. And it was one of the first movements that really considered soil microbiology, which is really cool. So you can explore this a little bit more on your own, but it really laid the foundation for organic agriculture, which gained steam in the 1930s. We're probably all pretty familiar with what organic agriculture means. Similarly, it's based on soil health, biodiversity, ecological cycling, a rejection of manufactured chemical inputs, embracing biodiversity and natural cycles, and natural pest prey or predator prey interactions for pest management, integrated pest management, all of those ideas. In 2002, the National Organic Program was formalized within the USDA, and we got that little green certified organic label, which is so important for growing the movement because it created this opportunity to market these practices, and then to get a higher price premium, a higher price back to organic farmers, because there was a cost associated with that transition and with organic farming relative to conventional. And so I'm going to come back to labeling a little later, but just know that the certified organic label has been hugely important for growing the movement and the practice of organic agriculture across a wider acreage. Organic is one of the most rapidly growing sort of set of practices worldwide, but it has been accused of greenwashing. There are a lot of critics who are saying that organic is leaving, or our current practice of organic ag is leaving a lot behind. It's now allowing monocultures to happen. It's not protecting workers. It's not necessarily protecting the environment in vulnerable areas in the name of producing a lot of produce. These problems are particularly acute in California, where this picture was taken. So that criticism has sort of fed into the evolution of a new paradigm of regenerative agriculture. And then I wanted to mention sustainable farm agriculture. Sustainability has become this ubiquitous word in our culture. It really was, the concept of sustainability was, the agricultural disciplines really contributed to that. So we as agriculturalists offered a lot to the world in terms of being able to think about how to be sustainable. And this concept rests on three stools. It's called a three-legged stool of sustainability, and that's thinking about economic ways to be sustainable, social ways to be sustainable, and environmental ways to have sustainable agricultural systems. And what that means is changing systems that in a way that ensures that farms stay profitable, that affords farmers good livelihoods, social in that we're creating healthy communities, and then environmental in that our agricultural practices are protecting the environment. And sustainability was different. This movement was different and distinguished itself from organic by allowing conventional concepts and the use of chemicals, but it's sort of a blend of organic and conventional in that it allows chemicals, but it also sort of almost requires the use of other conservation practices like no-till and cover cropping. And so a lot of this concept gave rise to the way that the NRCS has designed a lot of their conservation practices. So that sort of derives from a lot of the sustainable literature and way of thinking. So just a chart for how we got where we are. Biodynamic sort of fed into organic. There remains a feedback loop between these two movements, and those are really based on the rejection of chemical inputs, put succinctly. Organic largely gave rise to the sustainable agricultural movement, which allows chemicals, but then also requires cover cropping and other sort of holistic, keeping the ground covered conservation principles. And from these movements, we now are at regenerative agriculture. So I just show this to show how our thinking evolves and hopefully grows and progresses. I guess we'll know in the future. And a big difference between regenerative agriculture and previous paradigms is that it mandates the integration of livestock. So what does that mean? What does that all mean for practices? The main practices in regenerative are embracing an emphasis on no-till or minimum till, not turning the soil over, emitting a bunch of carbon. I'll go into all these in more detail later. Biological soil fertility management, no artificial chemicals or synthetics. Embracing a diversity of cover and inputs, and well-managed grazing, or intensive rotational grazing, it's also called. In terms of tillage, there's a long history of tillage in the United States and worldwide even, but this is sort of how it all started in North America. So you can see this is virgin prairie. This is a postcard, so I find this picture very depressing, but it was sort of man's dominion over nature, I think was the pitch at the time. But this was virgin prairie, just beautiful, diverse. It's been alluded to in the chat. This wonderful ecosystem that supported so much biodiversity. And the European settlers brought in their moldboard plows, and they took that beautiful root topsoil and they just flipped it over. And they did that for many, many, many years until the Dust Bowl happened, because all soil structure was destroyed through the repeated use of the moldboard plow and lack of use of a lot of these principles that we've since identified as being hugely important for soil conservation. So really, we've learned to reject this, luckily. And around about the 90s, we started to develop this sort of model of thinking of conventional tillage. Again, this is the moldboard plow. You can see completely covered, you plow, zero cover, soil flipped over. Conservation tillage was a rejection of that, and it said, okay, you can still till, but you'll have to just keep your tillage in strips. And this is still a good thing. Strip tillage is still used widely. It's still good. It's maintaining cover. Any residue that you can maintain on the surface is decreasing wind erosion over the winter and spring months in particular. Definitely helps. So the maintenance of corn residue, believe it or not, maintaining 30% residue was seen as a huge achievement about 20 years ago. And since then, we've improved our equipment and we've gotten to no-till where we don't need to till at all. And many people are practicing annual agriculture without any tillage, and they've done so for decades. And there's some pros and cons to that system, but in general, no-till has been found to result in less CO2 emissions, because when you mix the soil, there's microbes in the soil. The microbes in the soil are actually what cause the CO2 emissions, because they're eating and they're breathing out the CO2, and that's where those soil emissions come from. If you're no-tilling, you're not stimulating microbial respiration as much, and so you're keeping the carbon emissions down. Yeah, there are lots of cons with tillage, as we said, destroy soil structure. Aggregates are little units of soil structure. Tillage harms soil fungi and some of our other microbes, generally the larger ones. It'll destroy fungal networks, as you can imagine. And it results in all sorts of negative things like compaction, decreased water infiltration. There are some pros to tillage. When practiced rotationally, it can warm soil, it can mix nutrients up. And it's great for weed control and organic systems, and it's very difficult to produce any vegetables without any tillage at all. Maybe we'll get there someday, but we're certainly not there yet. So I'm just situating that's why minimum till is allowed in regenerative. And I should say that the great thing about integrating cattle, and a big reason why these prairie systems worked so well, is because those livestock, through their hoof action, they rip up the soil and they sort of mix it themselves. So they were doing some of that tillage action before any steel was brought to North America. And so that's the beauty of integrating livestock. In terms of biological soil management, we can apply composts and manures, and for organic agriculture, usually manures are required to be composted in a pile if you're bringing them on. If you're rotationally grazing, like Kirsten said, those animals are depositing them as they go, which is beautiful. And then also there's this concept of green manuring, where in an annual system you would rotate, let's say your corn and your wheat, you could rotate in a year of peas or other legumes, and then you would not harvest this. You would till that under, and then all of the nitrogen contained in that green material is being returned back to the soil. So that's sort of using a natural process to get more nitrogen and other nutrients mobilized and cycling into your soils to make those available for crops. There are a lot of different ways to green manure. It doesn't need to take a whole year. It can be done with a cover crop, but these are just sort of the practices that are recommended for biological soil management. And again, this is a rejection of these sorts of systems, which this is anhydrous ammonia, chemical nitrogen. All sorts of horrible things happen with this. This is pressurized fertilizer. We get horrible spills. It's bad environmentally and for human health. So regenerative agriculture says no to that. We're not going to keep going down that road. This is a pretty complicated slide, but I just want to throw out some of the why biological inputs enhance diversity, which is a huge tenet of regenerative agriculture. So we've got living roots in the soil. They're leading to all this chemical cycling in the soil through the feeding of soil microbes. Soil microbes need to eat carbon, so you need plants there to give the microbes food to be able to cycle these nutrients. Soil fungi secrete substances that create soil structure, which is hugely beneficial for a number of reasons. Here's sort of a look at the soil food web. You need bacteria. Here you need this organic matter. You need plants. Those are feeding bacteria and fungi, sort of the basic units or the base of this food web. And then we have sort of these mid-sized guys, nematodes, arthropods. Then we're getting into insects here, feeding birds, supporting mammals. We want to enhance diversity at all of these trophic levels through keeping the ground covered, keeping plants growing, keeping a self-regenerating cycle. Here are just some more nice photos of cover crops. Again, we don't want to have this in the fall, just like Kirsten said, we want to have something like this. And in the spring. So this is red clover that's been seeded underneath wheat or another small grain. You can harvest that small grain off, and that happens about July. And then by fall, you've got this really beautiful crop of clover. So that's one way. You can plant rye in the fall after an annual crop, and then that's a really common cover cropping practice here. Just keeping legumes in, keeping the ground covered, not getting stuck in sort of these bare soil systems is really important. And then managed grazing, which was already presented beautifully. Here's that single wire that Kirsten was talking about. Cattle in the landscape, just lovely. All these beautiful grasses, and they're rotated through paddocks like this. And the reason this is a big deal is because systems like this used to be really common. We call it managed grazing because those animals are being moved periodically, in Kirsten's case, every day. What people used to do, and they still do in many cases, is cattle are just put out and then left to their own devices in a certain area of land. They then sort of naturally will gather in certain spots. They'll destroy all of the vegetation there through overgrazing. There's sort of a vicious cycle where if cattle keep eating grass before it's ready to be eaten again, that grass eventually dies because each time they munch before the grass is ready, the root system becomes smaller. And then they'll eat it again and the root system becomes smaller. Eventually the plant dies, and then those areas usually become hugely degraded and the soil becomes compacted, and it makes it very difficult to reestablish grass in that area. And that's happened across wide swaths of the Western United States. Managed grazing is a rejection of that and a transition to letting pastures rejuvenate, not letting livestock degrade a certain area of land, making sure that the cattle get what they need to eat, but that they aren't put onto a section before that land is ready to support them. And so that's why it's a hugely important transition. And then when we are managing our grazers, they're not destroying stream banks and degrading water quality like they are in this picture, which has also happened in many places. So that's why this transition to management intensive rotational grazing is so important. And that's why professionals like Kirsten work so hard to spread the word about that. Moving on to product labeling. I mentioned earlier that organic agriculture, the certified organic label, and that certification is overseen by the USDA. That was hugely important to growing the movement. And so similarly, our label has been born for regenerative agriculture. It looks like this. It's called Regenerative Organic Certified. It was sort of based on this idea that, you spend 3 years transitioning to organic, you obtain certification in year 3, you've got that label, then a lot of people just sort of keep going. Many farmers are really good and they'll continue to evolve because these are the folks that like to learn and keep improving their land. But many don't. And so regenerative agriculture says, great, after 3 years, you got certified. Let's keep the foot on the gas here. And there are other certifications to pursue within this. And there's many animal welfare benchmarks that are really important to regenerative agriculture, which I didn't mention. Then they look like the certified humane global animal. You may see some of these on packaging. And then there is the incorporation of a lot of worker protection standards and sort of human and worker fairness, that they call it social fairness, which then gets brought in and falls under this regenerative organic certified label as well. And that's addressing some of the criticism that organic focused too much on environmental sustainability and not enough on social welfare and animal welfare as well. There are some critiques of this new movement. It's become hot really quickly. And so things can get left behind and neglected just as a result of that speed of growth. There's some criticism of regenerative is that it's really just organic agriculture repackaged. Do we really want to do this again? Or do we want to put our resource into something that's already pretty well established and then continue to try to grow that? However, this grew out of some criticism of the organic operation. The National Organic Standard Boards, that's what NOSB stands for, they decide who and what is allowed under the organic certification. They have allowed hydroponic operations to be certified. They've decided to allow large dairies, particularly out west, to be certified, they've also come under a lot of criticism for that. And so some say that they've seen the organic standards be watered down over time as more large corporations get mixed up in organic agriculture. And so for some, this regenerative label is a reaffirmation of these positive standards and progress away from a chemical paradigm. So I just wanted to draw those to your attention as critiques and some of the criticism, and a lot of that is sort of clashing between stick with organic agriculture or grow in this new direction. I don't think those two things will be mutually exclusive, but we all need to continue to push in that direction. And I think the more little hammers, the better, right? So I just wanted to bring it all back. These are our principles to remember. Ultimate goal is to enhance human and environmental health and climate change. Thank you very much. I just wanted to share really quick. At Michael Fields, we specialize in organic agriculture, and hopefully we continue to embrace some of these regenerative principles as well. I think our policy team does a great job with enhancing the social side of agriculture, but our mission is to help communities to be healthy environmentally, economically, and socially. And we do work in the research, education, and policy areas with an emphasis on supporting small and mid-sized farmers like Kirsten and other partners in this project. And we emphasize local production, going back to our roots as a biodynamic agricultural organization. You can follow our work by going to our website, michaelfields.org, and signing up for our newsletter, The Fields Report. You should see a pop-up box when you visit michaelfields.org. You simply need to enter your email address, and we will get a newsletter monthly to keep up with our events, including the events for this project. You can also follow us on social media at Michael Fields Agricultural Institute on Facebook, and on Instagram, our handle is Michael Fields Ag with underscores between those. Thank you very much.